Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, as Trump gets ready for what he thinks is going to be a trade showdown in South Korea this weekend, the reality is more like the U.S. once again coming to China with hat in hand, seeking a solution to a problem of their own making. And after continuously threatening Beijing with tariffs, sanctions, and the like, President Xi's patience is over and is expected to play some serious hardball with Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. In essence, China's going along to South Korea and is going to lay the law down. They've, they've said things enough times in the last, 6 months, and even through the Biden administration, that they weren't prepared to put up with this ridiculous attitude the United States has and accusations that they were making about China's conduct and behavior in places like Xinjiang and Hong Kong, etc. And the problem Trump faces is he has been desperate to have a meeting with Xi Jinping since he came back into office as president. And every time he has been refused. And it really rankles with him. It really irritates him. But the truth of the matter is, Xi's not really that interested in talking to Trump because the philosophy is, and correctly, well, we could talk to him today and tomorrow he'll change his mind. And next week he'll change his mind again. And then maybe in a month he'll go back to what we agreed. But is in essence what the Chinese are going to expect, amongst many things, and we'll come on to various things that are ongoing, is they want an agreement that's watertight, that no one can sit there and start backing out of. Okay, they probably will because they're Americans, but in essence, what it means is it's written there for all to see that this is what was agreed upon. These are the terms that both sides are, the concessions each side is prepared to make. So we can obviously have a trade deal that is mutually beneficial for both parties. They're not going to work on this basis that Trump's going to leave South Korea claiming China's going to invest $500 billion dollars into our economy. China's going to do this and China's going to do that, rather like he says about every other meeting he has. And then a few weeks later, someone asked the question, okay, so where's the agreements? What's been signed? And nothing's been signed, nothing's been agreed. And it turns out to just be, frankly, a load of nonsense. So that's the first thing. Unless there is something of substance, then forget it. We're not going to turn up. So you can have a photo opportunity, meaning Trump, and then try and tell the Western world, oh, Xi's my friend and China's going to do all these things. That is not going to happen. And that's a large part of why Xi Jinping has refused for a very long time to meet Trump. In fact, really refused to have any contact with him, except the occasional phone call, because he can't be bothered wasting his time with someone who treats the presidency as some kind of uh, platform to sort of massage his own ego, basically. That's not what a statesman is supposed to do, as we all know. And and that is why the United States has been begging the Chinese in the last week or two to make this meeting happen because Xi Jinping was very much like, well, what's the point? We're going to turn up as adults in the room, have a discussion, and it'll all fall apart. Nothing will be agreed. Or you'll agree with something, then you'll go home and a bunch of your advisors will tell you you can't do that. And then you back away from what was agreed. So we're not going to be party to that because it's a waste of our time. And we want a concrete resolution to the problems we now face, not more of the same nonsense that has been something characteristic of Trump's presidency since he came back in to power in January.
I think that's a really important point, that last one you did. The relationship between Xi, China, and the United States, Trump, back in 2016 during his first term, was much, much, much different. There was so much potential, not only with the United States and China, but also the United States and Russia, the United States with North Korea. There was so much potential for a much wider partnership with not just trade, but with development in that around the world. And that got sidelined, obviously, with all the political shenanigans that were done against the president in the latter part of his stage. But it really seems that from the moment he's come into office, and God, he's not even been in for 9 months yet. Well, barely 9 months. It's all been hardball, as if any of the agreements and relationships that he had cultivated 4 years ago, 5 years ago, are now completely set aside, and that everybody is an adversary or an enemy of against the United States. And when you look at it that way, it is not difficult to imagine why leaders such as Xi, Putin, and the like are extraordinarily hesitant to believe anything that comes out of this administration. Because if you look at it, Trump will claim something that didn't happen, then he will use his rhetoric to go against it in the media, and then his advisors or members of his administration will go and say something even completely off base again and make threats, et cetera, et cetera. So there is no singular policy that's being driven from Washington, and it's not surprising that Xi is saying, you know what, we can't trust this darn thing that comes out of Washington, your mouth, etc. There's no point.
Yeah, and if we start to delve into some of the detail, what's sharpened a few minds up in recent weeks and maybe even months in the US with respect to China is the fact that the US completely, well, the Trump administration completely misinterpreted how China would respond to this tariff threat. They thought if we put 150% tariffs on Chinese import, China will fold. And China sat there going, well, guess what? We're not paying for this. You're going to pay for it. So fine, you put 150% on, then you're going to be the ones, the Americans, who are going to pay for this via whether it's importers, whether it's retailers, whether it's the American consumer. But then the flip side is they said, okay, 145, I think it was, percent, we'll do the same. Oh dear, United States, now you've suddenly realized that there's no point you sending any of your exports to China because you've now priced yourself out the market. Well done. And that was one of the first big wake-up calls where they said, look, we're the one nation on this planet who is not going to tolerate this nonsense anymore. We're going to give as good as we get. And as they said, if you want to fight economically, financially, we'll fight to the end. And the end means the United States is going to lose. So another example of this was the United States trying, obviously, this endless trade war and trying to restrict Chinese access to technology. And then China suddenly, of course, lost patience because the US carried on trying to put Chinese companies on these entity lists, etc. And China came out and went, fine, okay, we'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put a ban on rare earths being exported to you and anyone we decide we don't like in the world. It's supposed to be a blanket ban. It isn't. Things will still go to places like Russia and friendly countries. But here's the problem, United States. You know those rare earths that we refine? You need them for everything, for military applications, for civilian applications. Okay, they've said they'll give it for civilian applications, but I imagine with respect to the United States, that is very much something under scrutiny because they won't trust the US not to claim it's for civilian purposes and then find it's nothing of the sort. So what did the United States suddenly realize? Oh, we're in serious trouble because we can't manufacture weapons anymore to give to places, ironically, like Taiwan or Ukraine. Even though we're not arming Ukraine, we're giving them to NATO, even though we are NATO, and then they're giving them to Ukraine. This kind of nonsense. So again, every time China responds to the United States is uh, MOs to try and cause damage to the Chinese economy, to the financial system. It blows up in the United States' face spectacularly. The other thing with regards to the aggression of trying to find adversaries in Asia Pacific to challenge China and try and back China into going to war with Taiwan so then they can tell the world China is the aggressor and we need to sanction them in totality like we sanctioned Russia. That's the ammo again. And that's failing to materialize. And suddenly the United States is finally realizing that China actually has weapons and technology they didn't realize they had. And they're also starting to finally realize that China is winning this tech war. That the US thinks they were 20 years ahead now. Literally every week, month, China comes out with new technology that means that they are now leading in many sectors of new technological development. And the US is powerless to do anything about that either because China is building its own technology ecosystem where it can thrive and survive on its own. And in the process, of course, of this idea of trying to tackle China and impose policy decisions they think will destroy China's economy and its technology base, it's actually again backfiring and causing huge problems for companies like Nvidia, who, because of the actions of the United States, is suffering enormously. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the Trump administration. So all these things constantly keep blowing up in their face. And the United States has begun to worry very seriously. But of course, we're the hegemonic power. We have to be perceived to be, the country that's the policeman of the world, and we're the global leader, and it's not China, it's us. And therefore, but we have to keep finding something to attack the Chinese with. But they're running out of options. And it's absolutely clear that Trump wants to go to South Korea, wants to meet with Xi so then he can come out with all this nonsense. Well, about how China's backed off, China's acquiesced to our demands, but China has already told the Americans, if you want to resolve this trade war, these tariff problems, the only way you're going to do, you're going to remove all restrictions on everything you've put in place with respect to China, whether it's sanctioning companies, whether it's sanctioning entities. You're going to scrap this entity list. You're going to scrap tariffs. And if you don't do any of this, and there's export bans, etc., then there's no negotiation because we're winning. You can do nothing to stop our ascendancy. And now you're finally learning that there is a country on this planet who's prepared to really stand up to you and lay the law down with you. Because the one thing that's kind of ironic, and I've said this, is Russia is a pussycat compared to China. People always think Russia's this big aggressive nation. And this might sound a bit hard to believe because I'm not disputing anything that's happened historically in what was the Soviet Union's history or Russia's history. But the bottom line is the current Russian administration is far less likely to want to have confrontation with the United States. It's not a position of weakness. They just think it's not the way to deal with problems. China doesn't care. China's attitude is if you're going to push us, we're going to come back with both barrels and we're going to make your life hell if we can. We have no problem with that. And this is something that's deeply shocked elements in the Beltway. They've been completely surprised by the fact that China, particularly since Trump came back into office, is constantly causing serious problems for the United States by reacting to US policies. So everything the US implement boomerangs on the US and is causing them mayhem.
One of the important things I think that has come up recently, even in the mainstream, they're recognizing it, is that China for the longest time, their policies, their diplomatic playbook was based on mutual consideration. Win-win for everyone. But since Trump has come back into office, it's really fascinating. They're noting that the China's diplomatic playbook now has changed to punch hard and give little in concessions. And by this, let me give four key points. Targeted countermeasures. If you remember when Trump first came out and said, "Oh, we're going to do a 50% tariff on Beijing if they don't, accede to our demands," and Beijing just sort of chuckled and said, "Okay, we're going to boost it to 100%." And then, of course, Trump, his ego was hurt, so it's 150%, and Beijing just laughed. Then, of course, using the leveraging of critical materials. Well, not only did China use the cutting off of the rare earths to the United States and Europe, but also said, you know what, your biggest uh, hold is the farmers, so we're not going to buy your soybeans. And that leads into the third point about diversifying trade. If you're going to be a bad trade partner, well, you know what? We'll go to Brazil. We'll go to elsewhere to get our soybeans. We'll go elsewhere to get the things we need. Even making agreements with Australia, who's a U.S. ally. And finally, other key thing is exactly what you pointed out. Focus on self-sufficiency. If China can't get chips from elsewhere, make your own chips. If we're having trouble with getting energy from elsewhere, we'll build uh, hydroelectric, we'll build solar farms, we'll research and make fusion a real thing. And when the United States then tries to say, well, we can compete with that, well, one, we haven't seen a single hypersonic missile ever come out of the United States yet. And then they have the audacity to say, we've got a plan and a project to have fusion ready between 2030 and 2035. Well, we already know from a video that Paul and I put out that China's already intending to go full on within 5 years. Do you really think the United States is prepared 10 years from now to be able to do this? So China already has all the cards and they've already prepared all the things. These aren't things that China could do. These are things that China is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point worth making is the whole issue of secondary sanctions, because weirdly, and this is a bit of an interesting story, the US put sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil in 2022, the start of the Ukraine war. And apparently now Trump's putting sanctions on them again, which is a bit weird because they've already had sanctions put on them. But, again, this is one of these situations where the whole point of this is to stop, he thinks, in inverted commas, Trump and his advisors, we're going to stop Russian oil exports to places like China. China basically told the United States to get lost. And the language was, who the hell do you think you are telling us who we can import oil from, or anything else for that matter? This is none of your business. I mean, because the US tries to, I mean, there are people in the administration who try to claim it's unlawful, when in fact there's no law at all attached to any of these sanctions. The sanctions are unlawful. They're not lawful. They're not based in international law. It's just the US decide, well, we think you can't do something, so therefore you're not allowed to do it. Now, I know there's been statements in the media that China's pausing its oil imports. It's not. China will just carry on because the same statement came out at the start of the Ukraine war. Russia never stopped doing anything. China, sorry, never stopped doing anything in terms of importing and exporting goods to Russia. This is just more Western nonsense. But this again is infuriating the Chinese because their attitude is, you need to understand one thing, America. We are now your equal. we are in really in economic terms. Our economy is bigger. We are now more than a military equal in some areas. We're way in advance of you militarily. We have far stronger technology base now than you do, etc., etc. So don't sit there trying to pretend you're an hegemonic power because we do not regard you as being an hegemonic power anymore. And from my experience, and I've said this before with China in business, and I've done enough business with the Chinese over the years, it's very easy to do business with them. You treat them fairly with respect. If you're really weak, they're going to walk all over you. That's true. If you're too strong and arrogant, like the United States, then they're not going to want to have anything to do with you. Basically, they'll do everything to ignore you and just carry on as business as usual. But if you're strong enough to say, look, we have these terms of agreement for a business deal, but I'm not happy with this, and here are the reasons why. 9 times out of 10, they'll go, fine, okay, we'll change them. No problem. And they respect constructive debate. They respect constructive ideas in terms of the business relationship. But the one thing that China absolutely abhors is if you go in and try to run roughshod over them and destroy them as a business. You do that, and they're going to come back and hit you 10 times harder. I've never done that because I'm not an idiot, and I would never, but I've seen it happen, and they can cause absolute mayhem, and they have no problem doing it. And that's the big difference. If you look at the Ukraine war, the Russians could have caused so many more problems for the likes of the United States, but it didn't. It kept exporting heavy oil, it kept exporting uranium and other critical resources the US needed through the whole of the war. It kept the supplying oil and gas to Europe, even if it wasn't through a blown up pipeline, but via some circuitous route. But it was ultimately Russian oil and gas. If that had been China, China would have just said, sorry, you're a proxy in this war. We're cutting off. You're getting none of our energy. None of our, we would just cut, they would have cut off all export to the entire Western world, who just say for argument's sake, it was to do with Taiwan and it was a proxy war, and no, none of this is reality, but it involved the NATO countries. All of them would have had a total export ban immediately. That's the big difference. So Trump better turn up and not think he's going to play his games, because China's had enough. And if you push China too far, they are going to respond in a very devastating way. And they have huge amounts of economic weapons in their arsenal and financial ones to cause the United States a world of pain they don't even want to imagine. That's something somebody, I don't know who, ought to point out to Trump if he turns up in South Korea and they do have any discussions, to not come out and make himself look like an idiot in the eyes of the Chinese. Because Trump also needs to realize that he's making himself look like an idiot in the eyes of the global South countries. In the process, he might not think it matters, but in this rapidly shifting world, it matters enormously.
Yeah, and if you think about it, he's already changed the course of diplomacy with India, which it would have taken a lot to get Modi to move away from their relationship with the United States. But I think he's done it by some of the actions and rhetoric over the past couple months. Paul, any other final comments you wanted to make regarding this?
No, I think that's fine.
To everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.